Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order at 5:35 p.m. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 28th, 2024 special meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Before we begin, as a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any type of noise devices. Also, this meeting is being interpreted, and we ask anyone addressing the board to speak clearly and slowly for interpretation. Tonight, we will begin the meeting with an open session to hear public comment before closed session. The first item on the agenda is the roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call for Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Dawkins?
Yes.
Present, yes. Board Member Espinoza?
Present.
Board Member Height?
Here.
Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor?
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran?
Here.
And General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, Chair Cantor is absent. The next item on the agenda is public comment before closed session. The purpose of open session is for the Rent Board to hear public comments on the following items to be discussed in closed session. The item for discussion under closed session is Public Employee Evaluation Government Code Section 54957, Executive Director. We have no speakers under open session. Since we have no speakers, I guess we can adjourn to closed session. So the open session to hear public comments before closed session is adjourned at 5:37 p.m. All right, everyone, let's begin our scheduled meeting called to order at 6 o'clock p.m. Again, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 28th, 2024 special meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. As a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any type of noise devices. Also, I have a few reminders regarding public comments. Individuals who would like to address the board, a request to speak card must be given to the assistant clerk before the announcement of the agenda item. If you would like to speak on an item not listed on the agenda or on the consent calendar, you must do so under the public forum. Please refer to the Rent Board meeting agenda for the list of items or the agenda items list open for public comment posted above the table located in front of the chambers. Also, this meeting is being interpreted. We ask anyone addressing the board to speak clearly and slowly for interpretation. The first item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Was that public forum? Was that public forum? Okay. The next item on the agenda is roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Dawkins?
Present.
Board Member Espinoza?
Present.
Board Member Height?
Here.
Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor?
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran?
Here.
And General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, Chair Cantor is absent. The next item on the agenda is statement of conflict of interest. Are there any? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is report from legal counsel of final decisions made in closed session.
There were no final decisions made.
Okay. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Are there any changes to the agenda from staff?
No changes.
Are there any other changes to the agenda from board members?
Okay. Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is public forum. Tonight, we have 4 speakers under public forum. Each speaker shall be allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board. When you are called to address the board, stating your name and city of residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. The first speaker is Ms. Alana Clark. Please come forward. Well, he did not submit a card. And just press the button, the little red or green button. Yeah, there you go.
The little red circle. Can you hear me? Okay. There's a lot that can be done differently. Our original ideas when rent control came to Richmond, our original hopes were that we would get a balanced implementation of rent control. We tried. We failed. We asked for HLR. We were promised raises that would address the historically low rents in Richmond, which was, at that point, just coming out of a recession. And many rents had been lowered during the recession for renters who needed it. This did not come to pass. We asked for capital improvement raises, which Oakland does. I believe they all do. Oh no, we have a way. You just apply for a rent increase through the regular rent adjustment. Well, that process starts with a 20-page document. That's just the beginning. That's the start. It takes many, many months. This staff has been really disorganized. Even just paying our annual fee has become a fiasco. I gave up last year and came in and handed them a check and said, please give me a receipt. And they figured it out, and they gave me a copy of the check with a paid stamp on it. Not very streamlined, but it worked. I know very few people who have been able to pay via eTracket, and none who have been able to do it successfully without multiple tries. If you guys are having trouble collecting the fee, that might be one reason why. So there's a lot that wasn't in Measure L that the voters did not vote for that you all can put on the agenda, and you all can discuss with the staff and discuss with us. I mean, we have ideas. It doesn't mean you have to implement them. Drop us a line. You have my email. There's a whole host of people with experience and know-how and who want to help. If you guys want to help, come on down. We're here. We're ready. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you.
The next speaker is Kimberly Graves. Please come forward.
Just start talking. Hi, my name is Kimberly Graves. I'm what I consider myself to be a mom and pop landlord. I'm here today to discuss the rent board rules and regulations, which are making me go through a year up to date, attempting to do an owner move-in. There's no rationale in the way mom and pop landlords are treated. I'm going to start with this. I agree that tenants should be protected, and so should the unhoused, the mentally ill, and all of our less fortunate in society. The solution, though, is not to make another segment of our society trade places with them. A Congressman, John Dingell, once said, "I'll let you write the substance, and you let me write the procedure, and I'll screw you every time." His statement rings truth because procedures, processes, and laws today are causing the mom and pop landlords to be screwed. A tenant is given a fee waiver regardless of income with no verification except the honor system. Tenants with free attorneys are normally instructed to ask for a jury trial. With a fee waiver, a jury trial costs a minimum for the tenant but can bankrupt the mom and pop landlord. The entire process is a game of chase the moving target, with one filing after another, of course, from the defendant, the tenant. The only benefit is this has taught me so that I can teach others. It is clear to me that this process was created to destroy the mom and pop landlords, not to save the tenants. In my attempt to move into my home, the tenant advised by her attorney to stop paying rent. This caused me to go through hell, emotionally, mentally, and of course, financially. There is even an attorney online teaching tenants how to screw the mom and pop landlords. After having a nervous breakdown, I hired an attorney to help me. Instead of helping, he charged me more than $20,000. This is without a jury trial, which, by the way, would cost the landlord $30,000 to $50,000. He had no mercy or desire to stop the drain on my finances. His advice was to be happy that you don't have to forego $150,000 in rent like his other client. After I began to question his motives, he then said he would not represent me. My former attorney was either incompetent with no moral compass, or because he is a beneficiary to this process, he felt he had a right to exploit me. The process allows the tenant to get a free attorney, a fee waiver, regardless of income, a jury trial at a minimum cost, thereby having nothing to lose. On the other hand, the landlord, with everything to lose, is forced to settle and forego thousands of dollars in rent. This process forces the landlord either to give the tenant $30,000, which is what was requested of me, in free rent, or pay $30,000 to $50,000, as I mentioned earlier, for the jury trial that they almost always request in the attorney fees. For a jury trial, the new procedures and rules of engagement claiming to save tenants are destroying mom and pop landlords. What part of America does that represent? And here's what I like to say. Not only are we as landlords required to get to pay $30,000 to $50,000 for a jury trial, but the tenant is given a free attorney at our cost because the fees that we pay for their attorney. So they have absolutely nothing to lose. We, on the other hand, and I would want to say this, my tenant at my home, 438 South 20th Street, she pays $2,575
Your time
a
has
month.
expired. Your time expired. Thank
Thank
you.
you. I'll be back.
Cindy, can we just remind the public, we have an interpreter, so got to slow it down for the interpreter, please. I see you struggling back there, interpreter.
Yes, thank you, General Counsel. The next public speaker is Christina Retzi. And please speak slowly and clearly for interpretation.
Hi, my name is Christina Retzi. I'm a longtime resident in Richmond. I love this city. I am also a housing provider, small landlord. When Measure L first passed, we worked extensively with Nick Traylor and the then Deputy Director Page, and hoped for a very fair implementation of rent control, one that would bring our city closer together. And unfortunately, as time has gone on, it seems that the services have shifted more and more toward what this last speaker was talking about, toward lawyers, toward fighting, toward, we were hoping for mediation. That would be a great, great service of the rent board. And if this new rent board is interested in exploring some of those ideas, like what would be less costly to our community emotionally, financially, in every way, bring us together, try to find fair solutions for everyone, including a lot of the small mom and pops, our working class landlords, they are kind of being driven out at this point. It's too hard to function the way things are going. So I don't want to belabor it, but I haven't met any of you, and I hope that maybe we can work together to come up with something that seems a little bit more wholesome and really make this beautiful city come together and realize its potential in every way. So thank you for your public service, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you. The next speaker is Linda Newton. Please come forward.
Hello, I'm Linda Newton, and I have a place in Point Richmond, and I have lived there since 2004. And I have people who are renting in my building who have been there for approximately 15 years. Two people who live upstairs and have 2 bedrooms, and one woman who lives in front of where I live with 1 bedroom. And it's a problem that nowadays I understand that the amount that we'll be able to raise the rent each month is only by now 1.4%. And in the past, starting in 2017, I think it started at around 5 or 6%, and then it was 3% for a while. But the woman who lives in front is ill, and so she can't afford to pay a larger amount than she's been paying, and so I've been keeping her rent reasonable. And the people upstairs are making a lot more money, and it just all of a sudden at a 1.4%, it seems like it's just not enough, that I'm going to have to deal with all the things that my property needs, et cetera, and that it just seems that I shouldn't have to pay more each year, that this organization has us pay more than we had paid before, and especially if we are unable to rent things out for more money. And so I'm very concerned and don't want to have a problem occurring. I want to make sure that everything works out fine for the people and for me as well, and that we shouldn't have to be putting out a lot more money to your organization in order for us to be able to keep our renters going just fine. Okay.
Thank you. That was the last speaker. Okay. The next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar. These items were continued from the June 17, 2024 regular rent board meeting. The list of consent calendar items are: item G1, approve the minutes of the May 7th, 2024 special meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Item G2, approve the minutes of the May 15, 2024 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Item G3, approve the minutes of the May 31st, 2024 special meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Item G4, receive letters from community members regarding the Fair Rent Just Cause for Eviction and Homeowners Protection Ordinance, RMC 11.100. Item G5, receive the fiscal year 2023 through 24 monthly activity report through May 2024. Item G6, receive the rent program fiscal year 2023 through 24 monthly revenue and expenditure report through May 2024. Item G7, approve late fee waivers for June 2024 pursuant to Regulation 425. Item G8, approve an amendment to the contract for community legal services with the Eviction Defense Center, increasing the contract amount by $200,000 for fiscal year 2024 through 25 to a total not to exceed $981,000 I think that's a typo, 244, and modifying the term to commence on July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. Item G9, approve an amendment to the contract for interpretation services with Interpreters Unlimited, increasing the contract amount by $15,000 for fiscal year 2024 through 25 to a total not to exceed $47,000, and modifying the term to commence on July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. And item G10, approve an amendment to the contract for translation services with the Spanish Group, LLC, increasing the contract amount by $19,000 for fiscal year 2024 through 25 to a total not to exceed $48,601 for the fiscal year 2024 through 25, July 1, 2024 through June 30th, 2025.
Thank you, Cynthia. Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
I second the motion.
Okay, I'll
Madam
take a
Clerk,
vote.
can we take a vote?
Okay, Board Member Dawkins?
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Yes.
Motion passes with Chair Cantor absent. Okay, now we're moving to item H1 under regulations. Item H1 is to adopt Regulation 613, establishing the 2024 annual general adjustment in the amount of 1.44% for tenancies commencing prior to September 1, 2023. This item was continued from the June 17, 2024 regular rent board meeting. There are no speakers on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the staff report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Guadalupe and members of the Rent Board. Nicholas Traylor, Executive Director. The purpose of this presentation is to announce the 2024 Annual General Adjustment by approving Rent Board Regulation 613. Section 11.100.070B of the Richmond Fair Rent Just Cause for Eviction and Homeowner Protection Ordinance provides that no later than June 30th of each year, the board shall announce the percentage by which rent for eligible rental units will be generally adjusted effective September 1st of that year. Adoption of a regulation is necessary to announce the amount of the 2024 annual general adjustment applicable to those tenancies that were in effect prior to September 1st, 2023. There is no fiscal impact related to this item. Now, Measure P amended Richmond Municipal Code 11.100.070B1 to explain that the annual general adjustment is equal to 60% of the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers in the San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose region, as reported by the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, or 3%, whichever is lower, for the 12-month period ending as of March of the current year. No later than June 30th of each year, the Rent Board must announce the amount of the annual general adjustment for the current year. This percentage represents the annual general adjustment that may take effect September 1st. As written, Regulation 613 announces the annual general adjustment by which the maximum allowable rent may increase for controlled rental units. To reduce the risk of error, staff members utilize the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics determination of the CPI in a given 12-month period. The change in the Consumer Price Index for 2024 is 2.4%. 60% of 2.4% is 1.44%. Because 1.44% is less than 3%, the annual general adjustment for 2024 is 1.44%. terms of next steps, staff members will draft a template rent increase notice for landlords' use based on the new 2024 annual general adjustment. These forms will be available on the rent program website within 30 days upon rent board adoption of Regulation 613. Staff members will send an announcement to community members announcing the 2024 annual general adjustment, and additional community engagement and education is anticipated to address questions regarding application of the 2024 AGA, or annual general adjustment. So the recommended action tonight is to adopt Regulation 613, establishing the 2024 annual general adjustment in the amount of 1.44% for tenancies commencing prior to September 1st, 2023. And with that, if the board has any questions, staff is available.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board? Okay. Seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers, if any.
We have no speakers on this item.
Is there a motion? It would be
I'll make the motion that we adopt Regulation 613.
We have to read the whole thing.
Establishing the 2024 annual general adjustment in the amount of 1.44% for tenancies commencing prior to September 1st, 2023.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Okay. Madam Clerk, can we take a vote?
Sure. Board Member Dawkins? Board Member Dawkins? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Hyde?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Yes.
Motion passes with Chair Cantor absent. We're now moving to item I-1 under Rent Board as a whole. Item I-1, staff recommend that the Rent Board authorize replenishing the reserves to a minimum of 18% of current year budgeted expenditures for the operating and stability reserve, and the maximum remaining for catastrophic legal event reserve and catastrophic reserve as described in the reserve policy. This item was continued from the June 17th, 2024 regular Rent Board meeting. We have one speaker on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the report from Board Member Dawkins. Oh, just kidding. Staff member.
Okay. 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 Good evening, Vice Chair and members of the board. I'm Fred Tran, the Deputy Director of the Rent Program. And this evening I'll be presenting the reserve policy to you. The board shall be an integral part of the government of the city and shall exercise its powers and duties independent of the city council, city manager, city attorney, except by the request of the rent board. The rent ordinance ensures the integrity and autonomy of the rent board. The rent ordinance vests the rent board with the sole power to oversee and adopt its own budget. The rent program's budget is comprised of reasonable and necessary expenses to achieve the purpose of the rent ordinance and is funded in whole by the annual housing fees charged to landlords in an amount deemed reasonable by the rent board and approved by the city council. In April of 2020, per the board recommendation and best practices presented by Kevin Harper, CPA and Associates, the board directed staff to develop a financial reserve policy. In January of 2021, the proposed policy was presented to the board and required a minimum reserve balance to maintain equal to 30% of the year's expenditures, not to exceed 50%. During the following board meeting, the board directed staff to revise the board to maintain a minimum balance of 18%. Also, it is not to exceed 25%. The reserve policy accomplishes the following three objectives. First, it establishes three categories of reserves and creates a procedure whereby those amounts within the reserves may be used. Secondly, it requires that any amount of the reserves spent must be replenished. Third, it sets a maximum cap of the total amount of reserves that can be held at one time and requires that any amount in excess of the reserve balance maximum, the cap, be used to reduce future housing fees. The rent board shall maintain a minimum special revenue operating fund unrestricted committed fund balance of at least 18% of the operating expenditures for budgeted stability, cash flow, and contingencies such as catastrophic events or unforeseen operating and capital needs. The first reserve level presented is the operating and stability reserve. The rent board shall maintain year-end contingency reserve balances of a minimum of 18% of current year budgeted expenditures. The purpose of the operating stability reserve is to provide fiscal stability and mitigate loss of service delivered and financial risks associated with unexpected revenue shortfalls during a single fiscal year or during a prolonged recessionary period. The next reserve level is a catastrophic legal event reserve. Its purpose is to offset unforeseen legal costs that exceed current allocated legal fees. Should an unforeseen lawsuit be brought against the rent board that results in the rent board owing fees and costs that exceed those legal expenditures provided for in an annual budget, the executive director or their designee shall have the authority to approve catastrophic legal event reserve appropriations. However, the executive director or the designee's approval to use those reserves shall not automatically result in the disbursement of said funds. Subject to the principles of attorney-client privileges and the Brown Act, the executive director or their designee approval must be certified by a majority of the rent board's members at a noticed board meeting. Their certification shall be accomplished or accompanied by a budget amendment confirming the nature of the emergency and authorizing the appropriation of the reserve funds. The third reserve level is the catastrophic reserve. The purpose of this reserve is to mitigate costs associated with unforeseen emergencies, such as disasters or catastrophic events. Such unforeseen events occur that require the expenditures of the rent board's resources beyond those provided for the annual budget. The executive director or designee shall have the same authority to approve appropriations and requests for those approval of used disbursements with the same requirements of the catastrophic legal events reserve. Should a catastrophic event occur, the required reserve level of 50% of any remaining reserve balance after the operating and stability reserve is sufficiently funded should be adequate to meet the rent board's financial needs. Financial projections suggest that the rent program will be able to satisfy proposed target reserve balances at the end of the current fiscal year 2023-2024. This chart also presents the starting balance for the following fiscal year's net of contribution estimated to be $758,000. A contribution in the amount of $109,252,000 is proposed to fund the operating and stability reserve, catastrophic and legal reserve, and catastrophic reserves to meet the reserve balance of current year budgeted operating expenditures. Staff members coordinated with the Finance Department to create sub-accounts within the rent program special revenue fund to maintain the 3 reserve funds. If replenished, reserve funds are approved, presented, are the balances contributed that would be made to the reserves. Recommended action. Staff recommends that the rent board authorize replenishing the reserve to a maximum of 18% of current year budgeted expenditures for the operating and stability reserve and the maximum remaining of the catastrophic legal event reserves and catastrophic reserve as described per the reserve policy. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Fred. Are there any questions from members of the board? Seeing that there are no questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers, if any.
We only have one speaker, Ms. Alana Clark. You have 4 minutes to address the board.
I was present when staff and the rent program board discussed the reserve. The rent program board at the time agreed to an 18% reserve, which I thought was generous, but what do I know reserves? I've never managed a budget before, thank God. As of last week, or last month, last meeting, whenever that was, Nick said that there is a 25% reserve. That's already a violation of the regulation that was passed a few years ago. 18% minimum, which is what this agenda item states, does not state a maximum. I do not think that's reasonable. 18% is a lot. And it goes up every year because the budget goes up every year. 18% of more money is more. When did that not become enough? Now, I spoke with you all last time, and I think some of you heard me, that times are really hard for housing providers right now. And as you know, 1.44% allowable increases this year is pretty paltry. If you want to give us some relief, direct your staff to draw down the reserves to 25%, reduce the housing fee raise as much as they can. Vote no on this. And if you have money left over, hey, use that extra money for down payment assistance and low-cost loans for eligible community members to become homeowners. That is one thing this program has, to my knowledge, never been part of. And that is money put to good use for the community, not to sit in some reserve account. Please vote no on this and direct staff that 18% is the percentage. Unless they have a specific reason why they need more, that's ridiculous. To just, oh, minimum 18%, period. It's ridiculous. Please vote no.
That was the only speaker on this item. And last speaker.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Okay. Can we do questions from the board? Awesome.
This reserve amount of money, so it's sitting and a City of Richmond account under our name?
Correct. There's the bank account, and within the bank account, it's split into those three reserves.
Is it earning interest?
It is.
That interest goes where?
It comes back to the program. Once the city collects the interest from the account, then they transfer it to the program.
Does that also go in the reserve amount, or does it go elsewhere?
It's recorded as income on a monthly basis once the city transfers it to us. So if you look at the operating budget, it also has a line item for interest and realized gains.
I see.
For this current or upcoming fiscal year, the estimated interest and realized gain was estimated at $50,000.
Do we have anywhere in our policy guidelines a maximum amount for these three categories?
The maximum amount is 25%.
Beg pardon?
25%.
And then after that's achieved,
Uh,
after we achieve the maximum amount, we no longer,
There's the reserves, and after the reserves, there's a fund balance. And once we hit 25% of fund balance, then we reduce the housing fees.
okay. Do you have an anticipated date that would happen?
It's basically based on our cash flow and how much fees we collect in a certain month. So the expenditures are on a monthly basis. If we collect more fees, the fund balance may decrease, it may increase. So typically, on an annual basis, the first 2 to 3 periods is when we bill and start receiving our housing fees. And after that month, I'd say the 4th period or so, we start receiving much less housing fees. And so for the remainder of the year, it draws down on the balance.
Thank you.
Okay. I had a quick follow-up question. Have we ever hit the maximum 25%?
No, this year is actually the closest we've come. We're right now just estimated as of the end of May. The maximum would have been approximately $825K, and our reserve balance is at $758K.
Thank you, Fred. Okay. So unless we have any other questions, do we have a motion from staff?
I'll make a motion that we authorize replenishing the reserves to a minimum of 18% of the current year budgeted expenditures for the operating and stability reserve, and the maximum remaining for the catastrophic legal event reserve and catastrophic reserve as described in the reserve policy.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay. Madam Clerk, can we take a vote?
Yes. Board Member Dawkins?
Yes.
Board Member Espinoza? Yes. Board Member Height?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Yes.
Motion passes with Chair Cantor absent.
Thank you.
We're now moving to item J1 under budget. Item J1 is to, 1, adopt revised fiscal year 2024 through 25 rent program budget, 2, receive and approve fiscal year 2024 through 25 rental housing fee study, and 3, direct staff to prepare a resolution consistent with the rent board's approved rental housing fee study and budget, recommending to the city council adoption of a 2-tier fee structure for fiscal year 2024 through 25 of $239 for fully covered rental units and $136 for partially covered rental units. This item was continued from the June 17th, 2024 regular rent board meeting. We have 3 speakers on this item.
My bad. Give me 1 second. Is it the staff report? Okay, thank you. We will now hear the staff report. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Good evening, Vice Chair Guadalupe and members of the Rent Board. Again, Executive Director Nicholas Traylor. The item before you this evening is the proposed budget and rental housing fee study for the upcoming fiscal year. Before we begin this presentation, I want to acknowledge Rent Program, Human Resources, IT, City Managers, and Finance Department staff for their assistance with preparation of the proposed budget and rental housing fee study. So let's first look at the statement of the issue, which ties this item back to the rent ordinance and its requirements. Section 11.100.060N of the rent ordinance requires that the board hold a public hearing and adopt an annual budget for the upcoming fiscal year no later than July 1st. The annual budget is funded by the residential rental housing fee, the amount of which is determined by the City Council following a recommendation from the Rent Board. In consideration of this requirement, staff members have prepared a proposed fiscal year 2024-25 budget and fee study and provided the Rent Board with a prior 10-year financial projection for its consideration and comment. The purpose of this item is to adopt the proposed fiscal year 2024-25 rent program budget and fee study prior to July 1st and direct staff to, again, recommend to the City Council approval of a 2-tiered fee structure for fiscal year 24-25 of $239 for fully covered rental units and $136 for partially covered rental units. The proposed budget and rental housing fee study for the 2024 fiscal year would authorize $3,299,011 million in expenses and $3,399,011 in revenues. The rental housing fee for the 2024-25 fiscal year is proposed as $239 for fully covered rental units and $136 for partially covered rental units. The rent program fulfills its mission with the help of 14 full-time employees. One of the office assistance positions is currently vacant and is proposed to be reclassified and hired in the second quarter of fiscal year 24-25. Next slide. As you can see from the proposed rent program organizational chart, rent program staff members serve a variety of functions, including general management, legal duties, administration of the hearings unit, billing and registration, and performing outreach education, mediation, and counseling to community members on the rent ordinance and associated laws. In fiscal year 2023-24, per Rent Board direction in May of 2023, additional support was needed for translation and interpretation services to allow for bilingual board meetings. Holding bilingual board meetings required an additional hearings unit staff to aid with handling an increased workload for the additional board requirements. After the recruitment process was concluded with no viable candidate identified, it was determined that the role can be reclassified to an administrative trainee or equivalent level. Once the reclassification is approved, the recruitment will begin in the first quarter of fiscal year 2024-25 for hiring in the second quarter. The rent program's budget is founded on the agency's mission, to promote neighborhood and community stability, healthy housing, and affordability for Richmond tenants by regulating those landlord-tenant matters that reasonably relate to rents and evictions while maintaining a landlord's right to a fair return. To effectuate our mission, we focus on three main goals: program development, outreach, and community education, and programs to sustainability and compliance. Successful public agencies are not static. They continue to develop by investing in staff, key tools, and services that are responsive to community needs. As we continue to invest in staff training and professional development, we do that to ensure that staff members are knowledgeable of the requirements of the rent ordinance, rent board regulations, and related state and federal laws. We work closely with newly hired and existing staff to increase understanding of the rent ordinance, rent board regulations, and internal procedures. Outside of our regular training sessions, we also provide training for our counseling staff in dispute resolution and mediation. The rent program utilizes key tools to administer and enforce the rent ordinance. Among those tools are online services, such as developing a filing system for the submission of property enrollment and tenancy registration forms, online appointment scheduling to manage our counseling sessions, as well as the filing of rent increase and termination of tenancy notices. Staff is currently working with the city to begin implementing a new database with the city's land management database system to better support the program and allow online enrollment and registration, as well as improving payment options for landlords who need to pay their fees. Among the Rent Board's key priorities is also enhancing legal services for Richmond property owners and tenants to address rental disputes. Staff are in the process of finalizing a contract with a vendor to provide legal assistance to Richmond rental property owners and renters in fiscal year 2024-25. Next slide. Thank you. Another important goal of our agency and requirement of the rent ordinance is to perform community outreach and education. Making sure that landlords and tenants are on the same page regarding the law and its recourse is central to enforcing the rent ordinance. So getting landlords and tenants on the same page regarding the law is achieved by increasing awareness of the rent ordinance, and we do that by publishing and distributing our guide to rent control, continuing to develop online outreach services, fact sheets, webinars, topics such as just cause for eviction, owner move-in evictions, rent increases, the rent adjustment petition process, the Ellis Act, and the relocation ordinance. In our budget, we're doubling the number of mass mailings to all tenants and landlords from 2 to 4 mass mailings a year. And we're increasing in-person outreach efforts by tabling at various community events and canvassing Richmond public schools. Another goal is to expand outreach efforts through targeted outreach to specific groups, such as, but not limited to, tenants and providers of affordable housing, realtors, monolingual Spanish speakers, Spanish-speaking households, small property owners, and problem properties or those with code violations. Expanded outreach efforts also include securing a new interpretation service for in-person bilingual rent board meetings and workshops, and connecting with and educating community stakeholders, including nonprofits, community groups, businesses, churches, on the rent ordinance and rent program services through regular community canvassing. To ensure that landlords and tenants avoid rent overcharges, staff continue to develop systems to produce notices of the maximum allowable rent to be sent to landlords and tenants when tenancy registration forms are submitted, including a database that may be accessible for landlords and tenants to research the maximum allowable rent for any particular unit of theirs. To better serve the needs of Richmond landlords, the rent program is planning on conducting a landlord survey in fiscal year 2024-25 to receive assessment and feedback from the rental community on the impact of eviction protections, rent stabilization, and associated rent program services. So program sustainability means being financially stable and sustainable. This requires providing the highest level of service to the rental community to ensure high levels of compliance through effective collection of the rental housing fees necessary to support program operations. So one of our goals is to improve and focus on the sustainability of the agency. So we know that the success of our program is tied to the ability to retain, develop, and effectively deploy staff resources in the most effective and efficient manner. This is being achieved through enhanced front desk resources approved in last year's budget to improve responsiveness and customer service, and conducting collection-related outreach to rental property owners who are not in compliance with the requirement to pay the residential rental housing fee. Being financially and organizationally sustainable also requires working collaboratively with other city departments to improve rental housing inspection options, rent assistance resources and their options, enforcement of the relocation ordinance, and collection of the residential rental housing fee and other city fees such as the business license tax, fire prevention service fee, and rental inspection program fee. Working with the City of Richmond to neutralize disincentives associated with cost-pool charges and incentivizing collaboration through a cooperation agreement will help ensure the long-term financial stability of the rent program. To achieve and maintain high levels of compliance and maintain financial stability also requires key tools, such as a robust and efficient rental housing and tenancy database. Rent program staff continue to work with the city to develop and refine the rent program's database, transitioning from using the city's current Track It database to a new database designed to work more specifically for the needs of the rent program. A more effective and efficient database will also allow for more accurate billing, enhancing the program's collection rate and improving the program's ability to accurately track apparent lawful rents. It will also allow the program to better track hearing decisions, eviction trends, and other data. The anticipated long-term impact should be a decrease in overall long-term staff costs.
Excuse me, Vice Chair. Executive Director, would it be possible as you go through these individual things for us to ask a quick question about something and get a quick answer rather than waiting to the entire end and saving from making notes and things?
Sure. Do you have any particular? What's up? Yes. So I think it's up to the Vice Chair.
You said it's up to me?
Yeah.
Oh, is that something that we're allowed to do? Yeah.
Yeah,
Are we open?
typically you would wait until the entire presentation, but you can deviate from your rules, but it's the privilege of the chair if you allow for that.
Okay. Is it okay if I ask the rest of the board
Yeah.
to make sure it works for them? What do you guys think? ¿Cree que estaría bien hacer preguntas? What do you think? You agree? Yes, if that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Was there a particular side that you had questions about?
Well, the reason why I'm saying there are a lot here, and I don't want to take 15 different notes. So, for example, I just saw an auto allowance that I hadn't seen before. You haven't gotten to it yet, but when you do get to it, I would like to ask a quick question and perhaps receive a quick answer, and then the matter is settled and we can move on. Is that possible?
Yes.
Thank you.
So thus far in the presentation, we've discussed our goals and objectives for the upcoming fiscal year. This next section of the presentation is designed to walk the board and members of the public through the categories of expenses we anticipate in the upcoming fiscal year. As I previously mentioned at one of the past board meetings, 85% of the agency's budget is devoted to salaries and wages. The salaries and wages allocation reflects salary-related costs for all budgeted positions and includes the Memorandum of Understanding negotiated monthly pay rate increase per each bargaining unit for executive staff Local 21, Mid-Management Local 21, and SEIU Local 1021. The rate increases took effect on January 1st, 2024 at 4% and 5% per bargaining unit. And the city will also increase the monthly pay rate by 4 and 5% on January 1st, 2025 for each bargaining unit. The overtime allocation accounts for $2,500 for the public information and enrollment unit for work that cannot be completed during regularly scheduled hours. Most overtime hours are anticipated to be incurred during billing and registration periods when there is a high volume of inquiries and thousands of mailers to print and assemble. The proposed allocation also accounts for overtime hours utilized during weekend or evening outreach events. We also have an allocation for a bilingual pay. The allocation accounts for the 2% salary premium granted to 7 bilingual staff members employed by the RENT program. These staff members include our staff attorney, our hearing examiner, a RENT program services analyst, our senior RENT program services analyst, our 1 compliance specialist, and 2 office assistants. Now, the auto allowance for the ED accounts to $350 per month, totaling $4,200. And I know, Board Member Dawkins, you had a question about this particular one.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what you were saying for the auto allowance?
The auto allowance accounts for an automobile allowance for the executive director in the amount of $350 per month, totaling $4,200 per year.
Yeah, it just seems high to me. So when I first saw it, I said, well, are we paying a car note? Is this for gas, driving around the city of Richmond? I mean, I don't understand. It just seems a tad high.
So the $350 auto allowance is part of the original employment agreement, or
So it's part of the contract?
it's part of the city's commitment agreement to pay the auto allowance for the executive director. Other department heads and executives in the city also receive an auto allowance as a normal course of business.
Okay, and that's determined by the contract as opposed to expenses for having a car?
It's, determined by the city's agreement, employment agreement with me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, beginning July 1st of 2023, the city began making contributions to a deferred compensation account for each executive staff in the amount of 2% of each employee's semi-monthly base salary to occur each pay period per the ratified memorandum of agreement. So that is also, that's a new thing that we've been budgeting for. In terms, another category of salaries and wages, of course, is our fringe benefits. The allocation for fringe benefits is provided to full-time employees, and individual plan changes or actual rate changes during the fiscal year may affect the amount expended. These benefits include our health benefits. You see $326,833 $38 for health insurance, dental insurance of approximately $19,000, employee assistance program, $252, vision insurance, $2,324, professional development funds for 14 employees, which provides for a reimbursement agreement of up to $750 for eligible expenses totaling $10,500, and Medicare taxes of $26,457. Life insurance at $4,047, long-term disability insurance at $13,025, unemployment insurance at $6,384, workers' comp insurance, 0 for clerical staff, $81,614 for professional staff, and other post-employment benefits budgeted at 0, miscellaneous benefits $514,435. So the rent program received the fringe benefits from the finance department budget analysts based on the projected total salaries and wages. Miscellaneous benefits refer to the employer portion of CalPERS pension costs for miscellaneous non-sworn staff. CalPERS costs are remitted in two parts, one being a percentage of payroll each pay period, and the other being a flat dollar amount per full-time employee for the unfunded liability. CalPERS provides an annual valuation report that specifies these rates and dollar amounts. Next slide. Two other key allocations are the allocation related to professional services provided by contractors for interpretation and other professional services. We have increased translation and interpretation services to accommodate additional requirements for board meetings. We've budgeted $19,000 for written translation, $41,700 for scheduled verbal interpretation and on-demand services, a $10,000 budgeted for doing a 360-degree evaluation of the executive director, and $20,000 for temporary employment services associated with filling in for a staff person that's going to be out on maternity leaves within a few weeks.
Excuse me, Vice Chair, Executive Director. We were negatively impacted, the rent board was, by cancellation of the on-site interpretation services on 4 separate meetings in the last fiscal year. Is there any way that's going to be mitigated somehow so we will not be impacted by interpreters we're expecting to show up that don't?
Yes. So as part of this budget, we have included additional funds to contract with a new interpretation service provider. We would first need to do a request for proposals and ask the board to approve that particular vendor that was selected. We still need to use the current vendor until a new vendor is found. Current vendor allows us to hold tonight's board meeting as well as the board meetings in next fiscal year as well until we find a suitable replacement. In the meantime, Interpreters Unlimited also does quite a bit of work with our hearings and appeals processes. So we would not, if we did not have them currently, or if we did not utilize them, we wouldn't be able to hold hearings that required interpretation. And of course, we wouldn't be able to hold board meetings until a new service, in-person service, was secured.
Yeah, my comment was strictly about the the negative impact on the rent board itself. I have a question for General Counsel. We spoke about the evaluation 360s.
Yeah,
Is now an appropriate time to?
Yeah, so I'm not sure why it made it in, but per our discussions in closed session, which I won't disclose in public, I believe the 10K evaluation 360 degrees should be removed from the budget. And you can discuss that after you hear the report.
Understood. Okay.
So instead of 90,000, it should be 80,700?
Yes.
Thank you.
Were there any other parts to your questions? Or okay,
No,
great.
Thank you.
Okay. Also allocated are funds totaling $9,500 for supplemental insurance for errors and omissions and general liability covered beyond the city's general liability insurance policy. To maintain the rent program's database, we have allocated $2,500 for annual IT charges for the city's land management system, also known as TrackIt. And to ensure that tenants and landlords can receive legal assistance related to rents and evictions, the rent program allocates $275,000 for community agency contracts for legal services for tenants and landlords, $200,000 of which goes to the Eviction Defense Center, which provides assistance for individuals who are responding to eviction proceedings, and $75,000 is allocated to fund legal services for Richmond rental property owners and tenants. The rent program is in the final stages, as I mentioned before, of negotiating a contract for a legal service provider for Richmond landlords, and that service will also be available to tenants.
I had a question. In these legal services, can either the tenant or the landlord who goes to these legal services, do the lawyers actually go to trial, or do either of these, do the lawyers go to trial, or they only offer advice?
The Eviction Defense Center does go to trial, or they go to court. God,
So they go to trial for either landlords or for tenants?
They go to court for tenants. They can write letters, demand letters. They can do more than just go to court, but their primary purpose is to defend tenants who are facing eviction proceedings. So now you also, was there another part to your question?
Well, I was going to ask if we finalize the contract for on the other part, will that allow landlords to use the landlords at trial, or?
So the anticipated scope of work would not include an attorney that goes to court and represents a landlord. Number one, this will only be a 20-hour-a-week attorney that is contracted, so that, number one, they wouldn't have the bandwidth to do that. Number two, what they would be doing is providing legal advice, which we cannot do, rent program staff cannot do. We cannot give, recommend strategy. We can tell a landlord, you should do this or that, or a tenant, you should do this or that. So that is the primary purpose. There would also be the ability to, for the landlord to, in addition to receiving legal advice, maybe have letters written or assistance with legal letters written, assistance with filing notices, making sure that they're in compliance with all the requirements related to the rent program, but also requirements related to filing an unlawful detainer or eviction lawsuit.
Good. Thank you.
To piggyback on that, from the name of the Eviction Defense Center, it sounds like they are representing tenants going through eviction stuff only instead of just like tenants having regular issues with their landlords. If it's
Correct.
not leading to eviction.
So the Eviction Defense Center primarily works with tenants who have received an eviction notice.
Right.
Now, eviction notices can be formal, sometimes they can be verbal, sometimes they can be written on a piece of paper, piece of scratch paper saying you need to leave. So they respond to those types of notices and respond also or assist tenants who are facing an unlawful detainer lawsuit, which requires a pretty quick response time. You have to respond within usually a 5-day deadline. Otherwise, you lose, the case by default.
Understood. So it's not like any tenant can just go up to them because they're having minor issues that aren't leading.
That's right.
They're not just representing every tenant.
No, they don't just represent every tenant. It has to be a tenant facing eviction.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Board Member Espinosa.
Cuando están diciendo que vamos a 2.500 para TrackIt, ¿sería también eso para la nueva base de datos?
When you're saying that you're going to use $2,500 for tracking, that's also going to be used for the new database?
The $2,500 for TrackIt is an annual fee that all the departments have to pay to maintain the database. It's a part of an ongoing cost to make sure that anytime a report needs to be put together or some new coding has to be put in the program to customize it for the rent program or other departments, you pay into this service to be able to do that. So essentially, it's for maintaining the database. And yeah, is there any other? Do you want to add anything to that?
It's primarily the licensing. So the city uses TrackIt as their land management system, and our program's portion of the licensing is $2,500 on an annual basis.
Entonces, esto seguiríamos pagándolo aunque tuviéramos una nueva base de datos.
So we're still paying that amount, even though we're going to receive a new database?
It's still currently being used. The other database is in a development stage right now. So until we go live with the new database, we are still continuing to use TrackIt.
Board Member Dawkins.
Executive Director Taylor. In the first paragraph, under 1, it's offering a legal services clinic for landlords and one also for tenants. Is that correct? So there is going to be a legal service clinic for the landlords out of the, what's the name of this? The Eviction Defense Center. So if I were a landlord, I could expect a legal services clinic to inform me.
No, the Eviction Defense Center doesn't generally perform legal clinics for landlords. Their job is to solely represent tenants. So, but the $75,000 allocated for legal assistance for landlords may include some educational workshops or clinics, but it does not. The Eviction Defense Center does not do clinics for landlords. They do have times where they kind of like lawyers in the library, where they actually go to the Richmond Library and are available for tenants for a eviction type clinic.
Okay, because I think the way it's written, it's a little unclear because it says we'll offer weekly legal service clinics for both landlords and tenants. So you're telling me that's not the case?
So the $200,000 for the Eviction Defense Center only goes to tenants. The $75,000 for legal services goes to landlords and tenants.
Okay, so that first paragraph is not correct.
May I?
Oh, of course, General Counsel.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not correct. And just to speed things along, if the board, when they passed their consent calendar, they renewed Eviction Defense Center's contract, and that was item G8, and for the public as well, it's item G8. If you look at item G8, the contract, the original contract's there, and there's in the contract, Exhibit A, titled Service Plan, describes the scope of service. And that scope of service is limited to tenants, and it's pre-litigate. Let me just read it. It essentially says tenants will receive pre-litigation counseling and review of documents with appropriate legal response and/or full representation in court at their unlawful detainer hearing. That's the scope of their service.
Yeah, thank you so much. The only thing that was misleading to me was the inclusion of landlords. I was expecting a service for them, but I'm finding that that's not the case. But there is a contract being finalized that will offer some legal assistance to landlords.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So we have 3 attorneys on staff. Our staff attorney, our general counsel, and our hearing examiner. And to maintain their law license required to perform their legal duties, we allocate funds for bar association dues, a legal and property information subscription. So at $675 per attorney, or $2,025 in total, we've allocated for California Bar Association dues, and $7,500 is allocated for subscriptions for legal and property information. Next slide. The advertising and promotional materials allocation of $3,000 accounts for newspaper announcements as required as part of the budget adoption process. That's $200. Advertising materials for increased outreach at $2,200, and a monthly promotion on social media accounts of equaling $600 for the year. Also budgeted is $6,881 for administrative program supplies and expenses. Those expenses include emails for rent board members, business cards for staff members, food and snacks for regular and special meetings, and Zoom meeting accounts. Next slide. An ongoing expense related to outreach and billing are costs associated with postage, mailing, printing, and binding. In total, $30,000 is to be collected for postage and mailing, and $30,000 for printing and binding. This is approximately a $30,000 increase compared to fiscal year 2023-24, reflecting the board's priority of doubling mass mailings for all tenants and landlords. The equipment rental allocation provides for funding of the lease of the combination printer, scanner, copier, and fax machine at City Hall. And the rent program works in partnership with the Richmond Promise, Arts and Culture, and the Department of Infrastructure, Maintenance, and Operations by entering a contract for a lease for 2 machines of the second floor of 440 Civic Center Plaza. And the cost of the lease is shared equally among participating entities, while the cost per copy is charged to each entity. The cost of the rent program is approximately $666 per month, which includes $558 for the lease of 2 machines and approximately $108 for cost per copy charges So at 0.0055 cent per page for black and white copies, and 0.0, or basically 4 cents for color. The city is exploring a new lease and printing copy structure, but in the meantime, we're using this one. Also, in fiscal year 23-24, the Rent Board authorized $300 to purchase a perpetual plaque to honor past board members. The rent program allocates $8,000 for office supplies, as well as $500 for the director's cell phone, also used as the program's cell phone for sending text messages, receiving text messages, and utilizing a number that can be used without disclosing the personal numbers of staff people. Next slide. In fiscal year 24-25, to encourage collaboration between the rent program and the city of Richmond, the city agreed to work with the rent program to reach a formal cooperation agreement. Presented are the cost pool charges that are to be transferred by the city back to the rent program to help protect the program's stability and recognize the support provided by the rent program to the city. Those charges include general liability, workers' comp, administrative charges or indirect costs, and civic center rent. And the proposed net allocation is $0. An operational transfer of funds from the city to the rent program will be used to offset cost pool charges as a subsidy for both fiscal year 23-24 and 24-25. The rent program will not be expending any funds to recover cost pool charges, with a 100% transfer approved by the City Council on June 25th, 2024. The subsidy will not be required to be paid back as a loan with any interest bearing, as it will be considered a transfer from the city to the rent program to offset those cost pool charges. The amount transferred will be $290,391. In accordance with the rent ordinance, the program's budget is funded by a residential rental housing fee paid by Richmond landlords. The table you see in front of you contains a summary of funds expended and collected for departmental operations since the program's establishment in 2017. Collection efforts for all assessed fees are an ongoing process, meaning we collect fees for the current fiscal year as well as for previous fiscal years that had not been paid. In 2019, the Rent Board entered into a contract also with a collection services agency to recover unpaid fees. And to date, the agency has collected approximately $125,000 in outstanding fee revenues. This figure is expected to grow as collection efforts continue. Now, as mentioned in Deputy Director Tran's previous presentation on the reserve, in February of 2020, the rent program contracted with Kevin Harper, CPA and Associates, to prepare a 10-year financial projection and recommendations in support of long-term financial stability. The 10-year projection allows for more informed decision-making by anticipating costs will increase 2% per year, with fees increasing by around 1% per year. And this allows the rent program to require reserves between 18 to 25% to ensure funds are available to cover expenses in the first 2 months of the fiscal year in the event revenue collection is delayed. Now that we have reviewed the financial projections and recommendations, let's move on to the fee study. Next slide, please. Section 11.100.060L1 of the Fair Rent, Just Cause for Eviction and Homeowner Protection Ordinance provides all landlords shall pay a residential rental housing fee to fund the rent program operating budget. The amount of the rental housing fee is determined annually by the rent board and approved by the city council. Under section 50076 of the California Government Code, fees charged for any service or regulatory activity must not exceed the reasonable cost of providing the service. Those fees must be approved by the city council as a legislative body in public session. A fee study is necessary to ensure that the residential rental housing fee recommended by the rent board and charged to landlords is commensurate to the level of services provided by the rent program. Similar to the prior fiscal year, staff recommend that the rental housing fee be established as a tiered fee, since different types of rental units are eligible for different types of services. Under this approach, costs of program administration are allocated among three components or layers. The first is a general program layer, which makes up 55%, a just cause layer, which represents 20%, and a rent control layer at 25%. Such allocations correspond with the resources dedicated to each component of the program. And this slide shows the different tasks associated with each fee layer.
Excuse me, Nick,
Yes.
really quick, sorry to interrupt. The interpreter
Yes.
is requesting a break.
Okay.
Is it okay if we
Certainly can.
do a quick break?
Yep.
Okay, do we need a vote to take a break?
And how long should the
And how
break
long
be?
you,
Yeah.
How long? How long? How long? Oh, 5
Okay.
minutes?
Okay, can we take a vote to take a 5-minute break
Okay.
really quick?
Board Member Dawkins? We'll take a 5-minute break. So we'll take a vote to take a 5-minute break.
Oh, the interpreter needs a break, so we're gonna vote on it really quick. 5-minute break.
Just a 5-minute break.
Now, right?
Yes, right
Oh,
now.
we gotta vote on it.
I need a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Well, who's going to do?
I'd
wait,
like to make a motion
Okay.
that we take a 5-minute break.
Okay, and can I have a second? Okay, and let's take a quick vote.
Yes.
Okay, Dawkins, Board Member Dawkins,
Yes.
Board Member Espinosa.
Yes.
Board Member Height,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Guadalupe.
Yes,
Okay, so we're at 7:30 right now. Come back at 7:35.
thank you.
Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order from recess at 7:36.
Thank you. Quick announcement and request for the public. Since we have interpretation, it is really hard for her to hear. Excuse me, members of the public that are here joining us, if you guys can please keep it down for the interpreter. It is really hard for her to hear, and Board Member Espinosa is getting some feedback. So if you can please keep it down or move to the other side. We would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you want to?
Nick,
Yes.
can you please continue
Yes.
with the presentation?
Yes,
Appreciate it.
thank you, Vice Chair Guadalupe. So, we are on looking at the applicable unit counts. The number of units applicable to the rental housing fee is one of the most important, if not the most important, input in the fee study. These numbers represent the units across which the budget is spread to calculate the rental housing fee. The table before you illustrates how our unit counts changed over the past year, with the overall trend being a modest gain in the number of applicable rental units. The 2024-25 fee study included, the 2023-24 fee study included 7,749 fully covered rental units. During this fiscal year, we saw an increase of 108 fully covered rental units for a new total of 7,857 units. The 2023-24 fee study included 5,987 partially covered units, and over the past year, we saw an increase of 148 partially covered rental units for a current total of 6,046 units. The number of governmentally subsidized rental units decreased by 48. This decrease was the result of a reduction in Section 8 voucher units and units where resident managers reside that are now unavailable for rent. In sum, last year, there were 18,134 units, rental units applicable to the rental housing fee, and we've seen a modest increase in the number of applicable rental units of 208 units. That brings this year's total to 18,342 rental units. When we use the updated unit counts as denominators for our proposed budget, we arrive at a budget of $3,299,011 and fees of $239 for fully covered units and $136 for partially covered units. Excluding the flat fee of $145 in the program's first fiscal year, between 2018 and 2023, rent program fees have increased by 14%. During that same period, the accrued percentage of allowable annual rent increases or annual general adjustments totaled 24% compounded. Now, while every rent program's budget and fees vary depending on various factors, such as number of applicable rental units and program model, those agencies that actively enforce their rent ordinances through robust outreach, education, and rent registration have fees that are comparable to Richmond's. So the recommended action tonight is to first adopt the revised fiscal year 24-25 rent program budget. Second, to receive and approve fiscal year 2024-25 rental housing fee study. And 3, direct staff to prepare a resolution consistent with the Rent Board's approved rental housing fee study and budget, recommending to the City Council adoption of a 2-tiered fee structure for fiscal year 24-25 of $239 for fully covered rental units and $136 for partially covered rental units. And Deputy Director Tran and I are available to answer any questions from the board at this time.
Thank you for that presentation, Nick. Are there any questions from members of the board? Board Member Height?
Well, I'm wondering, it looks to me like at 239, the rent fee, the full rent fee went up $19, and that's 0.07% increase. Am I correct in that?
The increase is a $19 increase. It changed from fiscal year 2023 to 2024 is 8.6%.
Oh, it's 8.6, okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Any other questions?
No, it's good.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers, if any.
Yes, we have 3 speakers on this item. Each speaker has 4 minutes to address the board. The first speaker is Ms. Alana Clark. Please come forward.
board members, there's one for each of them. Absolutely, yes. It's straight out of the packet.
Yes, please.
You can not start my time until everybody gets it, please.
Yes, can we please restart her time?
Thank you. Okay, so what you see before you is 3 pages. It's on scratch paper, so you can just ignore the back pages. The second 2 pages are straight out of the packet that was sent out to the public and to you before this meeting and before the last meeting. And I am specifically going to discuss the executive wages. So on the first page is, again, straight out of the packet, but I've added a column, and that's in bold. So first of all, I want to say that double-digit raises year over year over year is, in my opinion, not reasonable. It's completely uncalled for. And that is what this staff is asking from you. Keep in mind that any raises have implications for pension obligations that go decades into the future and affect the city's budget for decades. So it's not a small matter. And it has ramifications that last a very long time. That's just one of them. Now, if you will direct your attention to this first page, you can see the fiscal year, this fiscal year, and the next fiscal year, which starts Monday, proposed wages. And then you see on the last column is the 5 or 7% that they claim these increases to represent. This is not right. The actual increases are much, much higher than 5 or 7% in every case. Now, I wanted to say that this must be a mistake. I mean, it's 6th grade math, for God's sake, but come on, it's got to be a mistake, right? But then I went and calculated out the 5% proposed increases for beyond next fiscal year, and they are right on the money, 5%, 5%, 5% every year. So they know how to do math. And what this means to me is that they're lying. They're saying that an 8% raise, a 16% raise, a 22% raise, those are all 7% raises. And then the 16% raise and 18% raise down here are mere 5% raises. They lied. They are lying. And I don't think that kind of behavior should be rewarded with a yes vote on this budget. I think that I don't know what it is. I don't know what to say. I'm speechless. This may be the last weekday of the fiscal year. That does not mean that they get to ram this through. The sky is not going to fall if you say no. We are not going to stand for this. Go back to the drawing board. Do the math. Give yourself the raises you think you deserve, 5%, 7%, whatever, that you see here, not these salary increases that are just beyond. Please vote no, please. For once in your life, please vote no. I mean, unless somebody's blackmailing you, I don't see how you can go with this.
Your time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Vice Chair, I'd like to ask a question.
Are we able to ask questions?
You can after the public speakers are completed.
I would like to ask a question of our general counsel.
You're right.
After all the
After all
public
the speakers are
Okay.
finished.
Is that okay?
After all the speakers are finished, you can ask.
So, in a little bit.
The next speaker is Ms. Marilyn Langlois. Please come forward.
Good evening, board members. Thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you to staff for all the work you put into it. I do urge you to adopt the budget. I think it looks reasonable. I'm glad that the cost pool issue got settled and is straightened out, and that that's not going to be a burden to the rent program. I would like to see at some point, I know there was talk about this, and I would love to be able to see it in writing somewhere, specify the kinds of services that the rent program provides to the city, so that it's really clear, you know, it's a mutually collaborative and beneficial arrangement. So that's just a request I have at some point. Thank you.
And the last speaker is Ms. Kimberly Graves. Please come forward.
Hello, board members. So I wanted to piggyback off what Alana provided for you. And what I did was I looked at the math in terms of the difference from 2023-24 to 24-25. And for the executive director, he gets an increase of $16,223. The hearing examiner gets an increase of $27,747. The general counsel gets an increase of $40,796. The deputy director gets an increase of $27,288. The staff attorney gets $26,415. I, for my tenant, get an increase for the year of $37.08, which is the 1.44% increase that I'm allowed. I want to also say the way the current social views interpret rent control is such. Tenants are the guarantee for the need for rent control. Landlords are the profiteers taking advantage of tenants. And then the administrators of rent control, those executive directors that the executive branch I mentioned, they are the wholesome and liberal enforcers to protect tenants. However, in reality, the tenants and the landlords are both necessary for this business of rent control to continue. The administrators, executive officers, staff, and operators are the real profiteers, as I pointed out with their increases for the year. I say this because it is an atrocity that you would
Sorry
even...
to interrupt you. Can you please slow down for the interpreter?
I say this because it is an atrocity, and I need my time put back on, that the goal is to help tenants, and it's really meant to provide a fair rent basis for tenants. But I've heard you say nothing about, as Alana mentioned, providing some opportunity for tenants to own property, for them to be able to get some advantage from the money that you're collecting from the landlords to help the tenants to own property, and maybe some kind of subsidy for them, as opposed to looking at the landlords as the person who need to subsidize tenants. In addition to that, I want to point out the $75,000 that is shared between the landlord and the tenant is a joke for them to get some type of services. I am dealing with Eviction Defense Center right now, and every chance Lauren Russo gets to make me go through all the processes I have to go through. In other words, she threatens to go to a jury trial when she knows that they're not even going to be there for the jury trial. She files a motion for summary judgment. Then she cancels her motion for summary judgment because my opposition to that made her realize she didn't have a leg to stand on. Then when I file a motion for summary judgment, then she doesn't even follow the rules of the court, 31.50. She doesn't follow that. And then not only does she not follow the real legal way of doing that, but she also doesn't even present any opposition to my motion. So here's the point. This is a joke. It is meant to increase the coffers of those in the executive branch and the staff, and it's really not to help a tenant, and it is also going to destroy landlords. And when that happens, you will not have a rent control program because landlords will no longer want to rent, and they don't have to. So we can take our properties off the market. Thank you.
That was the last speaker and only the final speaker.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to do a quick reminder for the public. Your time was increased to 4 minutes to help the interpretation. So if you guys could please remember to slow down, or else our board member won't be able to understand and our interpreter is not going to be able to interpret accurately. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any questions from the board?
I have a question for the general counsel. General counsel, when we hear comments from the public concerning salaries, benefits, that kind of thing, would it be appropriate for one of the staff, maybe yourself as general counsel, to let them know that these numbers are the result of contract negotiations of which we have no say as a rent board?
Yes, the board, well, the board, namely the chair or vice chair in this instance, can comment on a public comment that they wanted to, or they can ask staff to comment on a public comment, or the board can choose, if the public's brought up an issue that the board wants to explore, the board can ask staff to confirm its numbers, for instance, to ensure that it's in fact within the limitations, because the board does have a duty to ensure that the budget is reasonable, right? The expenditures are reasonable and necessary, and the board has a duty to ensure that the numbers are accurate. So if you have any reason to doubt that, you can surely ask staff to explain the accuracy of the numbers and then the basis of the numbers.
If I understand you correctly, then it's okay for me to ask you to make a general statement that these are union negotiated, that these numbers are controlled by a union?
I would, because I'm the lawyer, I don't do the numbers. I would defer to staff, my colleagues, to confirm that the calculations are correct. But yes, you are correct. The unions negotiated certain percentage increases, 5% some years, 4% other years, and then there's an additional 2% that comes with it. It's called a longevity increase. If you've been here for a certain amount of time, you get 2%, and it's escalating from there. But I think part of the comment was challenging the accuracy of the calculations and not necessarily the basis for the increase. I think, right. So
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
So, Fred, I know it's come up multiple times. So do you have like a quick or something to confirm that these increases are accurate?
I calculated on a spreadsheet, but the increases are based on the class and compensation ratification of the MOUs as well. Last year, when the city implemented it, they actually, in November of last year, the scales all increased as well. So depending on what union each staff member is in, their increases could have gone up. There was a July increase as well as a January increase as well. There's a merit increase. So that's why when you hear that term double digits, it did increase by that much, and they are MOU, basically union negotiated increases, as Board Member Dawkins had mentioned as well. The executive staff are represented by the unions in Local 1021.
Thank you for that, Fred. Do we have any other questions from the board?
Can I make a general comment? Sure. Can I make a general comment? Oh, okay, thank you. Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Madam
board member.
Chairwoman. Well, I just want to say that the amount of, we've only had one set of people come up here, landlord and tenant dispute that actually came to us. And that one dispute was both the landlord and the tenant left satisfied. The staff has been doing a remarkable job of mitigating absolutely all the problems that come to them. And I think the caseload has like tripled or something in the last year. And staff did not ask for more personnel. So I think staff has really worked really hard to keep the expenses down. And I'm very impressed that you guys were able to do this. So that's it.
Sorry, can I make one correction since I spoke on the record? The bargaining unit for the general employees is 1021, and for mid-managers as well as executive, it's just local 21.
Thank you for that. Okay. So, seeing that there are no more questions, do we have a motion?
Well, I would like to make the motion that we adopt the revised fiscal year 2024-25 rent program budget. We receive and approve the fiscal year 2024-25 rental housing fee study. And 3, direct staff to prepare a resolution consistent with the rent board's approved rental housing fee study and budget, recommending to the City Council adoption of a 2-tiered fee structure for fiscal year 2024-25 of $239 for fully covered rental units and $136 for partially covered rental units.
Do we have a second?
Before you second, I'm sorry. Can you, if you don't mind, everything was fine, but perhaps another portion of the motion should mention the $10,000 removal for the 360-degree evaluation.
And also to remove the $10,000 out of the budget for the 360-degree
Evaluation.
Yeah.
Which, I'm sorry, but that removal will now result in a $1 reduction off the fee.
Cool.
So if you can just add that into your motion too.
And with the subtraction of the $10,000, the rental,
Housing fee?
the rental fees will decrease by $1.
Thank you, Board Member Height. Do we have a second?
Okay, Board Member Espinoza?
Okay. Okay, Madam Clerk, can we take a vote?
Yes. Board Member Dawkins? Board Member Dawkins?
Yes.
Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Yes.
Motion passes with Chair Cantor absent. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item K under Reports of Officers.
The only thing to report is that we had a great outreach event at Juneteenth. We had a group of staff, I believe 4 staff people that were there tabling, meeting community members, meeting various, folks in the community that play important roles in making Richmond a better place. And we're looking forward to continuing to increase our in-person outreach at similar events. So that was my only other report. Thank you, though.
Thank you for that, Nick. So that means the meeting is adjourned at 8:03 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.